Hey folks, welcome back. So this week we are working on a couple little odds and ends of stuff. It's still been pretty wet and muddy, and it hasn't really been great for trying to drive more fence post or do anything like that. Definitely been too wet to head up into the backwoods to try finishing off that fence line back there. But what we can do is we're going to head up this little hill back in here and over to the end of the middle woods, and we're going to do a little bit of burning. There's a couple of brush piles up there that have been sitting for probably a year or so, and even though it's raining out in this clip, if we get underneath the brush pile there a little bit, it's still nice and dry and it'll take right off, no problem. So next up, we had a little bit of a break in the rain, and we did some work on this hayfield here behind me. And of course, part of the process for that is to rip out all of the old fence, and in amongst all that old fence was a whole bunch of cherry trees. And so the process for that ended up being that my dad would go through with the skid steer, rip the trees out, and then I would come around behind with the chainsaw. I would cut off the bottom part, however much that needed to be. Sometimes that would be up like 4 or 5 feet to get above where any fence was running through the tree, and then I would go through limit, get all the small stuff off that I didn't want, and then I would keep the trunk either for firewood, or a couple of them were big enough to mill, and then those all got brought down here towards the mill house where I can work on them a little closer to where all the equipment is. So I figure now is as good a time as any to explain why this got nicknamed the Springfield. And as you can see, well, there's water flowing out here, and this only pops up when we get a whole bunch of rain. It has to be pretty wet for this to actually start flowing. Most of the year it's generally dry, but when we get a couple of weeks of rain on and off, it gets wet enough and it just starts flowing out of the middle of the field. Actually, it's towards the far end here, but just get some water coming out here, and it runs all the way down through here and eventually ties in to the creek at the other end. So another part of getting this fence here cleared out around the Springfield was coming up to this far corner right up in here where the old white oak had fallen over. Now this was like about a 5 or 6 foot diameter white oak that was standing up here. I counted the rings on a chunk that got cut off once it fell over. I think it was around 200 or 300, I think it was like 300 years old, something like that when it went over. But if you've been following the channel for maybe 4 or 5 years, this tree went over, I think, in the same storm as what took the covered bridge out. But anyways, when it went over, it took some of this property line fence with it. But because of the way it fell, this end of the trunk was actually still sitting up on the stump. And none of us really felt like trying to mess with this thing to get it off of there. So that meant the stump was still there. The fence was still kind of down through this section. So what happened is there just got a little bit of a temporary fence going around this section so that the cattle couldn't cross across the property line. And then that just was kind of the way it was for the next few years. Now, sometime in the last about year, this trunk finally fell off of the stump. The stump kind of got a little bit rotten, and the trunk was able to come off from there. And so at that point, now we're able to finally clear this stump out of here, because the stump's right on the property line. Get the stump cleared out and get that graded. We can get the original property line fence back up and kind of where it's supposed to be, and kind of get that all cleared out. And then that also let us pull out the temporary fence here, which then allowed us to pull out the remaining little section of the fence that's within the Springfield here, so that that's out of the way, so we can put in our brand new high tensile electric fence going around the Springfield. So to finish out the video, we are going to kind of sandwich it by doing a little bit more burning here at the end, and we're just going to head right up to the end of the Springfield. Got a nice pile of brush that's accumulated from clearing out all the fence lines along through here, and we're going to see if we can't get that cleared out of the way, because we'll have a little bit more fence right up around where that brush pile is for going around the water, the cattle water that's at the end of the field. So I got this pile going around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and had it burning for a couple hours before I noticed that it looked like there was a fire truck sitting up at the end of the farm driveway. And a minute or two later, I saw that they were sending their pickup unit down the driveway, and it was kind of coming towards where we were burning at. So they came down and asked if everything was under control, and of course assured them that it was. And they told us that someone had seen the smoke from the fire, and I guess thought that the woods were on fire or something like that, and called it in. So of course they're obligated to come out and check to make sure that everything's okay. And of course, while they were out here, they gave us the number for our local dispatch, so that in the future, anytime that I do burning from here on out, we can give them a call, let them know that that's what we're doing, and unless they hear otherwise from me, that they don't need to send anyone out to go suppress a fire. Now, I did think it was sort of interesting that it got called in, because I've burnt probably dozens of times out here at this point, really big piles of brush, and I've never had any issues with anyone calling it in thinking that something was on fire that shouldn't have been on fire. So I'm not 100% sure what happened there. I've got my suspicions, but I'll probably never know for sure. So I think that's where we're gonna wrap it up for this week. I have no idea what we're gonna have for next week. It's probably gonna be somewhat weather dependent and what I'm actually able to get out and do. But anyway, that is going to be it for this week's video. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you next time. So next up, we had a little bit of a break in the rain, and what we've been doing is we've been trying to prep this hayfield back here in front of me. Yeah, that made a lot of sense.